getting in your way while you're trying to steal the day. Not guilty.
It's time to talk about the future at the Roundtable podcast. We notice that this week is also momentous, not just because of the Iowa disaster, not just because of the State of the Union, which was triumphant in many ways, but also because President Trump was acquitted of the impeachment charges this week. And that signifies the end of at least two major assaults on the legitimacy of this presidency. I think what we could characterize the last 3 years as is an assault on that legitimacy and not the policies of the Trump administration. The policies come up every once in a while, but the constant theme since Trump was elected, even before he was elected, are whether or not he is a legitimate president, whether or not he cheated. At first, we learned that he was not a legitimate president because he cheated by wanting or asking for information from the Russians, emails from Hillary Clinton and the DNC. Then we learned he probably didn't obtain that stuff, but he wanted to, and that was bad. And then we learned there was really not enough to prosecute him or castigate him in that way. Maybe he wanted it, but he never received it. The Mueller investigation fails. Russian collusion looks like, at most, from their side, a weak desire, and it goes away. Then we get the impeachment, of the president, which again is going after the president for daring to go after the corruption of the other side. He wanted Hillary's emails because he thought there might be evidence of corruption, according to the left. And then he wanted Ukraine to go after Hunter Biden. Well, this week we see the end of all those efforts, and we should talk about the fact that now that those have ended, those efforts have ended, what will the future hold? Both what will the left do, and also what will the right do moving forward? David Barr, sitting there in the swamp patiently tonight. Are your kids in bed?
They're in bed.
Excellent.
They're somewhere.
Excellent.
There's not in my line.
That's a great feeling.
It's 8:20.
So
Do you
they're
know
alive.
where your children are?
Yeah, I have no idea. Yeah, it's wonderful.
So what do you think about this future moving forward? I mean, I guess the naive, ridiculous, I think to all of us attitude would be, oh, now Trump has finally thwarted the left and we'll move on and get to work on policy.
I don't know, Matt. That was kind of my view. I was listening to a lot of rap music today, and I thought about my pal 50 Cent getting shot. I saw this interview. He gets shot 9 times, and the interviewer asked him if he walks around with fear. He goes, "Are you kidding me? I survived getting shot. I'm not scared of anything. And if I was Trump, I would." This sounds ridiculous. I don't know why that just popped into my head. But if I was Trump, I would not just Trump, but his supporters. Especially people who hitherto been wary of kind of getting involved in backing any of his policies publicly or even privately, that he can almost start de novo now. That I do think that the onslaught has been so ferocious that there has to be that the liberals are kind of out of gas. I could be totally wrong about this, but if I were Trump and supporters and would-be supporters of the administration, I would use this precisely this time, and certainly if he's reelected, as a period to get great things done, because the vitality, to use James's favorite expression, is on their side. The energy and the momentum is all on their side. There's nothing to fear right now. I mean, he just beat he's just acquitted. I mean, this is a huge, and the Mueller thing, as you say, is done. This is a huge deal for him, and he should feel invincible. Now, not invincible in the way that he's going to proclaim himself monarch, like all of our buddies in certain publications are saying. Although just to fuck with people, you should try that out as a joke. He should tweet that he's going to become king just to make people lose their minds.
My integralist friends will love it. I mean, it'd be great,
One guy in particular, but I do think that I think he should seize the moment. Because you don't know, they'll regain their footing again in their own wobbly way, the left, but use this time. That's what I would do.
I like that. I mean, it's very, very optimistic. I mean, the bulletproof Trump, and I think there's some truth to that. I mean, he is now just walking around. What are you going to do to me next? What will you accuse me of next? You accuse me of colluding with a foreign government to ruin the United States, and you've done that through official means for a long time, and you failed. I get that. There might be more to it. But Spencer, what do you think?
Well, I think that Nancy Pelosi looks desiccated in every possible sense of the term. And I'm not actually...
She can rip up a sheet of paper.
Well,
yeah.
she can. Although did you see that she had to pre-rip it? Have you seen the video in which she makes little micro tears
Fair
in
enough.
the side?
You just made your point. Yes. Yeah.
It's not unlike the Hillary collapsing into the van video to watch Nancy Pelosi have to, chew her food and rip her paper in advance. And I'm not actually 100% sure. I think David expresses a healthy uncertainty about the extent to which the Democrats are going to be able to rally from these degrees of defeat. But to me, always, since impeachment began and before, Pelosi has represented a certain kind of old world common political sense and practical wisdom on a side opposite from my own, but nevertheless worthy of some kind of respect that she
does know some things about politics.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. She's a player. She plays that game. And that game is now quickly obsolescing, quickly passing from the world, as evidenced by the fact that Pelosi has been unable to stop the voracious advance of the Squad and the forces which they represent, Ayanna Pressley and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and so on, from basically hijacking the political machine that she has built these many long years over the course of her career and using it to perform an act of political suicide. And that is not something from which one easily recovers. I don't think that this is the end of the kind of shenanery and chicanery that the Democrats have been pulling on Trump. I think they'll pull it until their last gasp, long after he, I hope, is reelected. But I do think that act of ripping up the paper had a kind of symbolic resonance for me, that this old guard of political sensibility on the left actually has breathed its last gasp to make way for something much less sensible and much less viable going forward.
Very interesting. We should say for our viewers, generationally, where are you at, Spencer?
Oh no, we were talking
How
about
do you
this
identify?
Right. Well, I self-identify. I think that I count as a millennial pretty solidly.
Yeah.
And I tend to take it upon myself to speak for the millennials in rooms that don't contain other people who technically count as millennials. I was saying that I think digital native actually is a better descriptor all around for the divide that's going on in our polity at the moment. People who, for better or for worse, in many cases both, find themselves intuitively at home in digital environments are people with whom I relate on an intuitive level in a way that I don't with others.
Right. Yeah. Right. I got you. James.
Matt. How are you?
Much love. Much love.
Much love to you. Mitt Romney. Someone who may or may not be talked about a great deal over the next, over the rest of our lives. So
those are the two options.
Try to mute myself.
He voted his conscience, as every man should, when given the opportunity or confronted with the requirement to do so.
Certainly, every honorable man.
Yeah, everyone. And he voted on to convict on one charge, the abuse of power. He did not vote to convict on obstruction of Congress. And to me, what that reflects is that this whole mania, whatever you out there in the world hearing us tonight, today, this morning, whatever time zone you're in, when you think about it, it really was a struggle over obstruction of the intelligence community, obstruction of the deep state.
Yeah.
That is what was at stake. And the Constitution, as far as I'm concerned, worked. You know, back when Trump was running his terrible campaign for president in the early stages, I mean, it was truly bad, right? Like it was so bad that at the time, I floated the possibility that maybe the delegates on the floor would just dump the guy because it was clear that he was negligent in running for president.
Yeah, we've forgotten this. Yeah.
He was almost perversely terrible at running a campaign for president. And so, you know, some people, the delegates can't do that. Well, they could. If the delegates really said, you know, this is embarrassing, we've lost confidence in the guy, I as the delegate, I'm not gonna vote for his nomination. And that's the way the Constitution does impeachment. Ultimately, it's a political event. And ultimately, if you are a voting member of Congress in the Senate, you get to choose what your vote is going to be for whatever reason you want. And yes, we have a tradition of the rule of law and so on and so forth. But the deciders of last resort are these senators sitting there going, am I going to let this happen or am I not going to let it happen? And it's hard for me to think about the magnitude of that process in isolation from the real existential conflict between an executive branch that does not like the power that the administrative state, but that the deep state, the intelligence community has amassed, and an intelligence community that wants to destroy that administration. That was the real conflict. Mm-hmm. And what we saw take place during impeachment, and which is why I think it had this sort of surreal or not entirely, this sort of vaporware quality to it for many Americans, even those who had strong opinions one way or the other, was that it was kind of a shadow play, a feint for the real conflict that's going on. And if you're a member of the intelligence community who has been trying to throw every single weapon, tool, leg of lamb, whatever is in the kitchen, throwing it at this guy, trying to get rid of him, and it didn't work. It did not work. Yeah. You know, we can argue, probably will forever, about the ins and outs of impeachment. But for me, ultimately, if the Constitution can deliver a result that is accepted as legitimate by the American people in a balls-out confrontation between the duly elected president, head of the executive branch, and the never elected and totally unaccountable deep state intelligence community, that is a win at the end of the day for me.
Yeah, and I think that says a lot about the future. Obviously, right now, a lot of people do not understand the past or the present as this kind of deep state debate. But I do think baby steps you see over the last 3 years, a lot of people on the right and left at least acknowledging the existence of the deep state, the administrative state as a class, or whether it's celebrated or not, right? I mean, there was a distinct moment when all of a sudden there was an article celebrating the deep state, which had been denied. Its existence had been denied for a long time before that. And I think what you see now moving forward is an acknowledgement on the part of the right, at least, and it's still there in some of the hardcore left, that there is a class of people within American government who see themselves as the arbiters of what is just and what is not, and how governance should move forward. I think that, though, to talk about the future, that is a topic that James brings up about national security that I hope we'll talk about more in future episodes. We should move to a kind of alternate future, or an alternate reality that could have happened. And I want to quote this, David Brooks, of all people, had this tweet this week where he said this, quote, "Instead of spending the past 3 years on Mueller and impeachment, suppose Trump opponents had spent the time on an infrastructure bill or early childhood education. More good would have been done." Now, what I want you to notice about that is, forget about infrastructure or early childhood education. Imagine a world in which, instead of going after legally the legitimacy of the Trump presidency, people had debated about policy over the last 3 years. Right? If you imagine that world, and my response back to him, which has gotten a lot of course, lefty hate They'll have to hate him online. Not like he's a very woke rightist, but I think about this a lot. I mean, imagine what the world would be like without elite denial and the attempt to delegitimize Trump's presidency if we argued about policy again. But I think if you meditate upon that fact, it reveals almost instantaneously why both sides don't want to engage in it. They don't want to engage in the future. They don't want to engage in, in policy, because if they do so as part of the establishment of the right or the left, they have to acknowledge they have been wrong. The base doesn't agree with them, and the way in which policy should move is very different than what they've done in the past. And this is an enormous problem. In fact, this is the problem we face at the American Mind, and we should talk about an article that an intrepid journalist has written about us in the next round here. So, as part of this future segment, there's an article in the tablet called The New American Millennial Right by Park McDougall. Is that how we say his name?
It is.
Park is, he called us all, and we had extensive interviews with him. Very interesting guy. He wrote some articles recently that I think are very well crafted and fashioned, where he's really trying to expose what intellectually is going on and not kind of putting himself into the article. And this article in the tablet, I have a problem right away with the title. The New American Millennial Right. Well, I fancy myself, at least, someone part of Gen X. And I feel like even people who are millennials don't want to be called millennials. I'm not sure what generationally is going on there, but his article is about what the new right is. So what is the future? Where are we moving on the right? And he mentions the American Mind and quotes from Ryan Williams, our boss, who is not here as we drink Laforgue, and also James Polis extensively in very interesting fashion. So I think we should talk about this article, which is talking about us. I mean, we don't care about, we just want to move the ball forward, but we're not here to, tout our own press. But this is actually a kind of interesting article, and we have some things to say. What do we have to say, James?
Well, man, I mean, I'm going to talk about Christopher Lasch right now.
Yes.
Because I know that probably in the future, left conservatives, at least 3 or 4 of them, are going to be listening to this podcast. And damn it, they want to hear about Christopher Lasch.
Might be the most important ones.
Their hero. And with, and for good reason. So,
Yes.
So Christopher Lasch, had a string of very popular and very, black-pilled books in the 80s. The Minimal Self was one. Was the Culture of Narcissism? Is that what it was called?
I think so. Sounds right.
Yeah, and he was infamously an advisor to Jimmy Carter as president. Mm-hmm. And in fact, and this is a very intelligent man. He was not just sort of a writer of pop, readily digestible books. During the 80s, he was a true social and political theorist. He wrote a huge book called The True and Only Heaven, which is just an excoriating academic treatise on progressivism and the folly of progressivism. There was a collection of essays that came out in the very early 90s, I think posthumously, just barely, called The Revolt of the Elites. So this is a guy who was very well tuned in to where not only what was going on, but where things are headed. And so as he was advising Jimmy Carter as president, he was more or less responsible for the infamous Carter malaise speech, which has gone down in history as this sort of flatulent expression of resignation and failure, the air just coming out of the balloon of America. I don't know, you guys, to put a sweater on. It's going to be a cold winter in America, Oh, no. Which was not what was intended, right? So Lasch and Carter were trying, and I can't believe I'm the guy in the room who's going to be the Jimmy Carter apologist for the night. What they were trying
As
to
the Simpsons
do,
said, history's greatest monster.
right?
But
Yeah.
okay,
What
fine.
they were
James.
trying to do was express to the American people, television, a bad medium for this. We can get into that another day. That indeed, at the end of the very, very long 70s, I remember my dad saying, I can't explain to you how painful it was to see the years just sort of start to roll into one another. And it was like, this is it? Like, Wang Chung is the #1 song of 1970, whatever. You stay up all night listening to the
Very
countdown.
cosmopolitan.
And that was #1? What Lash and Carter, I think, were trying to get across was that the answer to that feeling of malaise that crept in, and that I think is still very much with us in certain ways, and in some ways, sort of the flabby decadence of the 1970s is having a second act right now among the neckbeards and people who feel like they're stuck is sort of grinding away on their apps, dating apps or otherwise. The solution to that is not to throw yourself ever more fervently into these sort of bizarrely aggrandized fantasies, right? Like, it might be time to take a step back, take an inventory, maybe just like ramp down a little bit until you have the presence of mind and the perspective to face up to reality. Right? It's not like more Coke in the discotheque is not going to deliver for you.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously that's different from what like a Ronald Reagan brought to the table, where it was morning in America, damn it. But the importance of Christopher Lasch is that this was a guy who took class seriously. He took the transformation of the left into a vehicle for sort of narcissists and megalomaniacs who had come into money and who were hedonistic. He took that seriously. And this is a passage, this sort of unpacking of Lasch, that appears in Park's discussion of what the new right is. And although Lasch was nominally on the left, culturally and socially, he was quite conservative. And as Lasch, puts it, he's interviewing another person who you can find on The American Mind, Charles Lehman. And Charles has this great line, and, much love to my libertarian friends, but Charles is like, libertarianism is it was a way of announcing that you're contrarian and a right winger, but that you're totally cool with the way that sex works in the American upper middle class. Charles telling Park here, he's become disillusioned at the ripe old age of 25 with freedom as quote unquote self-actualization. There is, he said, a strong realization that it actually makes people quite miserable. So what's going on here? Christopher Lasch's warnings about the perils, the hollowness of self-actualization as this sort of cult that replaces, whether it's sort of Christian rectitude or even just kind of, flinty American common sense, right? Is this promise that's been dangled in front of generations and is ultimately proved to be quite hollow. And I think to the degree that, the things that we talk about here, and the things that are going on the sort of Lasch-friendly left, there is overlap there, right? Yeah. There is sort of an overlap between Sandersism
Absolutely.
and Trumpism. And
They're both talking about lived reality.
Yeah, and it's my
the problems of lived reality.
It's my hope that going forward we can indeed find some common ground.
Yes. Let me stop you there. Let's talk about Park's article. So this article in the tablet is, again, about the new American right. I'm going to excise the word millennial. But David Barr, you read this, and we've thought about this today. It just appeared today. He did interviews at length with a lot of us. What's your impression?
I'm grateful for the piece, for the publicity, but I think you would be forgiven for having read this piece and then thinking the editors at the American Mind just like lift weights, and in between sets I'm
trying to lift more weights, by the way.
What's the
Bar.
problem here?
Just a minute. Besides trying to lift weights, I'm also trying to open this bottle. Just listen to the sound.
It's not easy.
Of this Lefroy 10 just opening.
That is not a Foley artist,
that's
folks.
good.
That's the real thing.
That's real.
But yeah, go ahead. I mean, you get this impression from Park's article.
Look, that all we do is kind of like sit around and publish people with the name like Space Age Moonbeam and what have you, and that it's like Frog Twitter and Frog Twitter adjacent. Yeah, I don't think that there was enough attention paid to in abstract the conversations, the important conversations that we're trying to host on the site where everybody from Senator Marco Rubio to Anne Marie Slaughter to Bill Galston have published with us.
Right.
And part of what I'm excited to do at the American Mind, and this is not an accusation that I'm trying to level toward Park. It's just I'm happy that we can talk about this now at some length, is publish people who traditionally would have been unable to crack into a more mainstream publication. So I worked for almost 2 years at the Weekly Standard, and I saw just how difficult it was for people to submit and then crack in to the magazine. There's a finite number of pages. It's just impossible to accept untested names. I think at the American Mind, we are trying to publish people who don't have a track record in mainstream media and who have nevertheless important things to say. So it's not kind of this like same tired journalism. It's the same op-ed you're reading time and time again. I think we're trying to do something that's a little bit different but still serious. So I think that the article missed a little bit of that. But for what it purported to do, I think it was okay.
Hearing James talk about there's another Lefroy. Kill it, James. You got it. There's like only a little bit left. Hearing James talk about, is that it? Are you done? I'm sorry.
Some dad scotch energy tonight.
For our listeners back home, we haven't had an opportunity to say yet. We are drinking the Lefroy 10, an expression of an Islay Scotch, often maligned, mostly by liberals and mountebanks, for its saltiness, for its proximity to seaweed. But in fact, what it is, it's like drinking a campfire. And for the record, we have finished a bottle now between the three of us. I think
it's really Lefrog Twitter that we.
That's
Lefrog
right.
Twitter is where yes, the esoteric meaning. And the description of it as drinking a campfire is absolutely right. This is the scotch my grandfather used to drink.
There you go.
And we owe a great deal of debt to Spencer Clavin for bringing this bottle in for us tonight.
Perhaps in our show notes we can publish my pictures from my actual trip to Islay and the Lefroy distillery, which I've been longing to get out there in some way.
That is excellent. But go to David's point.
I'm sorry. Yes, I got distracted by the pouring of Lefroy.
DC.
I will respond. Yes, I will respond to Bar, and I'll also respond to James. What you are saying, James, about the deadness and dead-endedness of millennial and 20s and 30s life in urban America at the moment makes me think of a strain of commentary that I've seen recently on Twitter. I'm thinking in particular of a wonderful account I follow called Proper Opinion, @PropUp. Mm-hmm. And he is a young-ish, it seems, man who is recently married, and now, congratulations to him, his wife is pregnant. And he tweeted recently something that I've seen other people tweet, which is, whenever you tell somebody you're getting married or you're recently married from a certain generation, the response you get is, oh, isn't it nice that you're currently in the honeymoon phase? Look forward, ha ha ha, to a miserable life of infinity depression and infinity shackles and so on. And Prop responds to say, look, maybe actually people in my generation watched our parents get divorced, and maybe we were paying attention while that wreaked havoc on us and our siblings. And maybe we're seeking something like a better life for ourselves that is modeled more along the lines of fidelity and commitment and the old virtues of marriage and family life. And I think whatever problems we may have with Park's use of the word millennial, I think what's really true is that coming down the pike, there is a return to traditionalism that is being adopted by people who are dissatisfied with what was sold to them by an older generation. And you can recognize it in people of any age, whether it be Angelo Codevilla or Donald Trump or Doc MJP or anybody at all. You can tell that
that's
people
me,
get this. Yeah, sorry. that's Matt Peterson.
MJP,
Doc MJP.
I'm still furious that I had to put Doc in there, but I couldn't find any other MJP.
So that's, I think, what this whole movement is getting at. And I do think it cuts across generations, but that I think it's particularly vital and urgent for people who are setting out to build their lives in a way that's more sustainable than the generation before.
Okay, so these are all incredible thoughts, and we've gone way over time, and we're completely belligerent at this point. We're unguarded. We don't have any fences, no boundaries. Isn't that what progressives want? But let me sum up. I mean, we're talking about the future, and this article by Park is very interesting. He's trying to tell a lot of people within the Northeastern bubble, the whole corridor, what is going on with the new right. And I don't think actually there's much interest or attention in this. They have very little idea, even still, as to what's going on. But I do think that by the time January 2021 rolls around, people will start paying attention. If you're listening to this podcast, you're 8 or 9 steps ahead, as James and I like to say. And he's pointing towards something that is real. And you may not believe me, but that's okay. I would suggest reading the New American Millennial Right at Tablet Magazine to get a little sense of what's coming down the pike. Because as far as the American mind and Claremont is concerned, we're not just representing, some brand of, quote, conservatism. We're talking about things that are very real to the people and communities that we know and love.
Your bedtime story.